What's good, CDL fans, and welcome back to Champ Sunday with Jake Maverick. Today, we're going to be primarily talking about Major 1, obviously the event that just happened this past weekend. Absolute banger, but I figured the best way to talk about it will be we'll go through the placings, we'll talk about each team, and then I'm going to give you my takeaway for each team from the Major. It could be what I think they're going to do, what I think they're best at, what I think they need to fix, things like that, but we'll go with one takeaway for every single team. We'll also obviously close out with the Ask Jake segment at the end of the video. I got a bunch of questions on the last one that I can't wait to talk about. But real quick, before we start talking about the Major, I do want to say thank you guys for all the support on the watch parties and everything over the past few weeks, and especially this past weekend. The Major watch party was insane. I mean, a ton of viewers, a ton of new people popping into the streams. I mean, watching LAT play, watching Miami make a run, looking at how good FaZe was. Obviously, a couple disappointments here and there, but overall, the support on the content was incredible. So I appreciate you guys a ton, man, and just thank you guys for all the never-ending support. But let's talk about Major 1. First things first, this event was just absolutely insane. Obviously, the grand finals, which we're going to get to, was one of the best finals I think I've ever watched, and I've been watching COD since 2011. In terms of the overall event itself, there were 6 3-0s, which was surprising because I think there were only 7 3-0s in all of the online qualifiers and the minor leading up to this event. So kind of showing the discrepancy between some of maybe the top teams and the bottom teams once you actually get to LAN. Because, I mean, listen, as Simp said in that first listen-in they had, he said, welcome to LAN, right? It's a different story when you're on stage. So we saw 6 3-0s, which was definitely interesting. But we also saw 7 Game 5/last maps, so including the finals, the Game 7 technically, but 7 last maps out of the 18 series. Is just, we've been seeing Game 5s a ton so far this year, but it just continues to deliver on LAN, just seeing how good these teams can be against each other, how competitive this season is, right? I mean, we saw upsets, we saw teams make runs, we saw tons of close maps, tons of close series. Major 1 was just like one of the best ways we could have started the year, right? Last year, we're going to talk about the grand finals even more later, as I said, when we talk about LAT and FaZe, but talking specifically about like the grand final itself, that was last year we didn't see a single last map. Last year, I think we saw maybe like 1-4-2 and then a couple 4-1s and then what, like 1-4-0. Like, we didn't see any last maps last year at all in any of our grand finals. I believe the last 4-3 grand final was Major 5 of MW2, which at this point was obviously well over a year ago. So seeing that, you know, we already went to a Game 7 in the finals, we already had so many Game 5s, I think we're just going to see how amazing and competitive Black Ops 6 is. And for me personally, I've seen people debating this online. I think this year is a blast to watch. I've seen people on Twitter, like in the Zoo Mafia Twitter community, saying like, I'm not interested in this year, especially if my team gets knocked out. I just don't really care. But for me, bro, I mean, obviously, I want to watch LA Thieves. If they're knocked out, though, I'm still going to watch because I'm just a COD fan at the end of the day. But even putting that to the side, like, these matches are just entertaining. Like, I mean, matches from just like middle of the pack or bottom teams that, you know, you would think it's like the Burger Bowl are entertaining these days. So, no, of course, the maps could be better. Of course, you know, spawns could be better and things like that. But overall, I actually think it's super competitive this year and a lot of fun to watch. But now let's start talking about every single team. And we're going to work our way up or through the bracket. So we're going to start with the teams that get eliminated top 12 and work our way all the way up to the finals. So let's talk about the LA Gorilla mates first. Obviously, they lost 3-2 in the Game 5 versus OPTIC Texas in losers round 1. LAG is a weird team, right? Because we've seen through the online stage, and even now in the only one series they got to play on LAN, they're very competitive, right? They just can't close out series. And the big thing is obviously their search and destroy. This team just is not good enough at SND, which is why it feels like, even though they only have like, what, 1 or 2 wins at this point, they should have more. I mean, looking at their map records, they're 7-9 in hardpoint, right? So not the greatest, but it's okay. 6-3 in control, so they're good at map 3s, but they're 4-9 in search and destroy. They just can't close out series because they can't really win map 2. And then obviously if you go 5, they haven't won a map 5 all year. I think they're like 0-3 or 0-4 in map 5s at this point. So the SND is really the big thing for them. Also, their fans, the green suits, which is what the Gentlemates fans are, they were going crazy all weekend long. I mean, the Gentlemates fans genuinely were one of the best parts of the event. And without them, the crowd would have been completely dead at this event, other than like the occasional Miami, you know, Spanish crowd cheering for their team as they made a run through the bracket. But the Gentlemates fans were insane. So my takeaway for LAG is, and this one might be a hot take, people might come at me for this one, I think they have the best fans in the league. The Gentlemates fans were genuinely amazing this weekend, cheering for so many different teams too, not just obviously LAG because they got eliminated early. But the reason I say they're the best is because, like, once OPTIC got eliminated, you saw how empty the venue got. You saw how quiet it got. All the OPTIC fans just kind of left. They didn't really care anymore. By the time the grand finals came around, right, people got back in the venue. But once OPTIC was out, the OPTIC fans were pretty much gone or quiet, whereas the Gentlemates fans not only continued to support their team, right? You saw the videos of them like cheering for the team as they were leaving the venue, but supported other teams where they were supporting Hydra. They were supporting all different teams that were playing on stage. Were trying to rival the Spanish Miami fans. They genuinely are, I think, the best fan base in the league. And also, did you see how much they cleaned up the stands? Someone took like a video of like their stands compared to like down on the floor where a lot of like the other fans were. They were super clean. So the Gentlemates fans, man, shout out to you guys. If any of you guys are part of the green suits, let me know in the comments. But LAG fans are elite. Now to move on to the Vegas Falcons. I mean, there's not really going to be a lot to talk about for these guys. They just can't win, right? Like, at the very least, they need Kicks to come back. And even if he comes back, I still don't know if they can win. They're just not fundamentally in respawns, and even in search and destroy can be hit or miss, but SMD's obviously their best mode. They're just not up to the caliber of a pro team. I mean, just to go right to my takeaway for them, they just need to keep working on the fundamentals of respawn, right? Especially hardpoint, because they have not won an HP this entire season so far. They've only won 4 maps, 3 searches, 1 control, have not won an HP. I mean, they're probably going to be the worst team that's ever played in the CDL by the end of the year, right? Seems like that'd be hard to be because all you got to do is get more than 2 wins and beat out Vegas from Vanguard, or would they Paris at that point, but beat the Legion from Vanguard. Yeah, this Falcons team, man, if you're a Falcons fan, I'm sorry. Your team's just, it's cool to see. I will say, it's cool to see the talent and see what a guy like Xnid or King, right, who just got onto this roster a couple series ago, or even moments where like Dahum or Roxas or Kicks, you know, different guys that have been on this roster throughout the season already. It's cool to see some of the moments they can have and what they're capable of, because talent, like skill, you know, the gunny is there. They just need to learn how to play respawn. So once they kind of get that dialed in, they'll maybe be more competitive. They're more competitive than they thought they were going to be already, which is pretty cool, but just keep working on respawn. I think they'll figure it out. And then we move on to the Vancouver Surge. And this team needs to make a change, man. Like this Vancouver Surge team, I was low on them coming into the year. I didn't really think like Hixie and 04 was a sub duo that was going to work. 04 can be kind of fast paced, right? He's going to die a lot, but he's probably going to get a decent amount of kills. And Hixie's a bit more of like selfless, right? He's a bit more objective minded. He's not really a slayer. And when you have 04 dying a lot and you have Hixie who's not really a slayer, a lot of it rides on the ARs to get kills, and Nasty's not really a slayer, although he can deal damage and he can have his maps. Abuza, I feel like can be a slayer, but just hasn't been at all this year, so they just don't have anyone getting kills on this team. Like, they just need someone consistently to get kills. Their teamwork is just not good. They're just not consistent at all unless 04 is, like, playing perfect. Like, if he's playing really well, like we saw the last weekend before the major, he was playing really well, and they won 2 matches. When he's playing well, they're good, but when he's not, it's just not really anything they can do. So for me, the takeaway is they absolutely need to make a change. 1 or 2 people. I think Hixie's probably going to be on the way out. Maybe one of their ARs, maybe Nasty. I don't feel like they'll drop Abuza, even though I don't think Nasty's been bad enough to be dropped, but there might be some challengers players that could come in that could be better. They just got to bring in someone. I think there's really 2 key things I want to see from them. You need someone who's going to get kills consistently, right? Like, you just need someone who's going to guarantee you kills. Maybe a guy like Pred could be interesting, but I don't know if he wants to go to a team that just finished top 12. And I also feel like they need someone to, like, IGL. I don't know who their IGL is in the listen-ins. I can't really tell. You go around the map. It's just, they're not together. And you need someone that's going to be in the comms, like, keeping the guys locked, keeping them playing together, and just to help the teamwork in-game, right? Like, teamwork can feel good when you're talking to your coaches, but when you get in-game and the coaches aren't there anymore, it turns into a free-for-all. So I feel like they need someone to get kills. They need someone to help with the IGL and just keeping the troops rallied in-game. So yeah, Surge, just top 12. I mean, it was kind of expected. And then for our last T12 team at Major 1, it was the Boston Breach. Really disappointing. Like, really, really disappointing major performance for me out of Boston. Purge was just not good on LAN. I mean, I feel like he got cooked like every single map. It was just super underwhelming. Awakening and Cammy had their moments, also had their really bad moments. This team, I think they need to make a change. I think they need to change their ARs. I think Purge and Snoopy, you let them continue to build. I feel like the teamwork and the chemistry between them is really good, even though Purge struggled on LAN. Snoopy was still really good, just to add that in there. But they need to bring in an AR that's going to help Snoopy with the kills. And that's my exact takeaway, is just get somebody that's going to get more kills and help Snoopy in that department, because Cammy's not a consistent guarantee slayer. Awakening used to be, but he's not anymore. I don't know what happened to him over the last couple seasons, but he's not Awakening of years past, you know, back in Vanguard or Cold War 2019. Like, he's not getting kills like that anymore. And they need someone that's going to help Snoopy consistently get kills, especially on LAN if Purge is going to underperform on LAN, which some players just do that, right? So that's my big takeaway. Get Snoopy some help. Now to talk about our 2 top 8 teams. We'll start out with Cloud9 New York. Obviously, I mean, they were better on LAN, right? And this is a team that had, I think, 2 wins, right? Online, and they come onto LAN, they get a win over the Boston Breach we just talked about, a team that they were probably expected to lose to. Many people thought C9 would be top 12 at this major. I still think they need to make a change. You know, this team, it's kind of weird as to who do you make the change, right? Like, people want them to bring in Pred because of his history with Mac and accuracy and Sib. But their SMGs are good, man. Mac has been good. Kremp has been good. It's really been their ARs that have been underperforming. Sib was good on LAN. So for me, the takeaway, and this kind of sucks because I really like Attach. He's one of my all-time favorites. But for me, I think you drop Attach and you try to bring in a selfless main AR that's going to gap fill. It's going to sit in hill. It's going to help organize the team, be more of like the human UAV type we've seen on some other teams. Don't think Attach and Sib are working, because I feel like both of them can play a little slow at times. I feel like both can kind of play for themselves. Not saying they're selfish players, but can be selfish at times, where Mac and Kremp are running around, getting kills, doing damage, you know, playing with each other, and then they're just not really getting enough support from their AR. So I think if you bring in this more selfless AR to fill in for Attach, let Sib just have the green light to do whatever he wants, I think this would just help the whole team in general. And I do think Attach is someone that could get picked up on another roster. Maybe he's someone that goes to like a Boston Breach, like I just said, right? You drop Awakening, maybe you bring in Attach to just, I just think he's a better Slayer than Awakening. You know what I mean? And Cammy's already going to be their IGL, going to be their leader. So that could be interesting for both of these, but that's kind of my takeaway for C9. I just think they need to make a change if they want to find more success. And then for our other top 8 team, it is none other than OPTIC Texas. I mean, most disappointing team this major, without a doubt. I'm sure for pretty much everybody watching this, unless you're an OPTIC hater, I'm sure you loved watching them go out top 8, but super disappointing performance. They came in as the #1 seed. They played the 8th seeded team in the Miami Heretics, who were 2-5 coming into this. And they lost, right? I mean, they lost the game 5, they beat LAG, and then they lost to the Ravens. Honestly, for OPTIC, there's not a whole lot to say. Their hardpoint was abysmal. It was nowhere to be found this weekend. People have been trying to blame Hook. They've been trying to blame Kenny. Shotzi and Dashy were pretty much doing nothing a lot of the time this weekend. So I don't even think this is like a blame one person. I genuinely think the whole team struggled. Hook was their best individual player. There were some times where he went rogue and, like, you know what I mean? Maybe died or pushed something on and flipped the spawn when he shouldn't have. Something in my eye while I'm trying to talk about this. But I think this just goes on the whole team. I don't think this is one person. People want to bring back Pred. People want to do this. People want to do that. I don't think OPTIC needs a roster change. Honestly, my takeaway for OPTIC is just to block out the hate, block out the noise, and get back in the lab. We've seen top teams have bad majors and bounce back. It happens to pretty much every top team other than like Atlanta FaZe, right? Because they pretty much always make top 3 other than a very, very few times. Just kind of get in the lab and just block out the hate and get back to what you're doing. They clearly are good enough to play the game, right? I know online versus LAN is different, but fundamentally, if you're playing the game correct online, you should be able to replicate that on LAN, and maybe they just had one of those fluky bad majors. That's at least personally what I believe at this point, right? On February 3rd, right after the major. Major 2 is a different story if they do this again, but for now, I just block it out, keep grinding, and just try to figure out how you can implement what you're doing in practice and what you're doing online when you actually get on stage. And also, Major 2 is their home major, right? So that should be fun and should be hopefully something that they can perform well at. And also, if you're going to Major 2 here in Dallas, Texas, let me know, because I will be there. So hopefully I get to meet some of you guys. All right, let's talk about our top 6, our 2 teams here. We got the Toronto Ultra up first. I mean, T6 is just lower than expected for this team, right? Like, you think Toronto, especially at their home major, I mean, they technically hosted it, although the crowd didn't really seem to be that into Toronto as much as they were for LAG or Miami or even LA Thieves, right? With the French team or the French fans rooting for Hydra. Honestly, for Ultra, it was really the SND. Ultra was one of the best SND teams the entire online qualifier, but it just absolutely let them down when they needed it most here on land. They just could not win search and destroys. The big takeaway for me, though, is just Insight needs to speed up a little bit, especially in Respawn. He played a bit faster in certain maps this weekend, and we saw how much better and closer they could be. And I think for a team, I think Kleenex put him to the side because Kleenex is going to be Kleenex. He's been one of the best subs every single year. I think he's still continue to do that. But I think for Beans and Joe Deceives, these two have massive, massive maps. Like, they're both going to have a map where they go 30 plus 1.3 KD in every series. But they're also going to have a map where, like, they just kind of get cooked. And sometimes it happens at the same time. So for me, if Insight just speeds up a little bit, I'm not saying he's going to slay and, like, fill in the gap of Beans or Joe Deceives if they're struggling. But picking up the pace a little bit means he probably gets into more gunfights, means he probably does a little more damage. And either he's going to help finish kills or he's going to help, you know, Beans and Joe Deceives and Kleenex finish kills. So, like, that extra bit of damage, the extra bit of pace on the map, especially in BO6 with how fast-paced this is, I think personally would make a massive difference for this Ultra team. But yeah, I mean, top 6 for them was just obviously a disappointment. And then our other T6 team was the Minnesota Rocker. And I mean, these guys, I just said it in my video I put out this morning for the power rankings. They are like the dark horse this season, right? Like, if I had to pick one team that you can never count out of a series, you genuinely never know if they're going to win or lose a series, it is this team. It is the Minnesota Rocker. On land, Gio looked amazing. He, I think, was the #1 KD. I mean, I know they didn't play as many matches as like a FaZe or, you know, a Thieves, but he was the #1 overall KD this event. I think Estriel had some great series. I think Nero had some great series. I think Paul X, unfortunately, is just the odd man out. What he brings to this team, maybe in the comms or the chemistry and things like that, you know, might be something that me as an outsider looking in, right, doesn't really understand fully. So maybe there's more to that. But for me, the takeaway here is I think you replace Paul X. The obvious answer, in my opinion, and in the opinions of many of you guys watching this, as we've been talking about throughout the watch parties, is Illy, right? They brought in Paul X specifically for Search and Destroy. That is what Gio said in a post-game interview in the beginning of this season. He still hasn't been that great in Search. Illy is notably an SND kid, great at SND, but also good in Respawn, can pretty much consistently get kills. I mean, he might have a map. Everyone has maps where they get cooked, right? But I just think Illy's like the obvious replacement. He's going to help their search. He's going to be better in Respawn than Paul X, if I had to guess. So for me, that's the big takeaway. Just maybe it's not Illy, maybe it's someone else, but I just think you get someone to be a bit more consistent, especially getting kills over Paul X, and I think that just makes this team better. All right, now we get into the top 4, man. I mean, listen, these 4 teams, if you told me this was going to be the top 4 before the major started, I probably would have let out a little laugh. I mean, I think 3 of the 4 is understandable. Obviously, Miami making this was very unexpected. But even Ravens, right? If you would have told me Ravens were making it over like the Ultra in Optic, I would have been like, I don't know if I necessarily think that's true. I think a lot of people thought Ravens might be a team that bows out top 12. Oh, not top 12 because they played Falcons and losers, but maybe top 8 losing to somebody in that losers bracket. But to talk about the Ravens first, I mean, Vivid was playing with one eye, Vivid as we were calling him, right? Because he lost his one eye. He was playing well, honestly, once it looked like he was able to see fully out of both of his eyes again. I mean, considering he had a single eye for that first day and then half an eye for the second day, they still performed well. They still looked competitive in every single series, right? Even though in the first series for LAT, they kind of got slammed, right? I mean, they scored 110 points in total, I think, across the 2 hard points. But they look decent, man, even with Vivid having the health issue that he was having. And even when his eye was open, I'm sure he still didn't feel great, right? So it's kind of promising for them to think that they still got top 4 despite some of the, you know, adversity and unexpected struggles they had to experience. Honestly, the takeaway for me for this team, though, is like, this is Tej's team. I thought coming into this year, it was going to be give Gwyn the keys. Like, this is his roster. Bro, this is Tej's team. Tej is so good at BO6. People are saying the Jackal revived his career. I mean, the Jackal is the God gun, right? Like, everyone knows that if you've played or have watched the game at all. But Tej is just consistently that guy. I think in every series they won, you know, CDL Intel, shout out to them on Twitter, posts like their MVP of the series with the stats. I think he was the MVP every single series. He was probably voted the MVP of every single series they won on Breaking Point's website too. He was just great. I mean, Gwyn was still really good. I think he's proving he's good on land. Slasher had, you know, some moments and some maps, but also had some bad ones. And Vivid was honestly pretty good, you know, like once his eyes were a little bit better. So the takeaway for the Ravens really is this is Tej's team, and I think they just keep doubling down. People want to replace Vivid. Honestly, I don't think you mess it up, bro. I think if you get top 4, you just kind of got to ride it out. It just doesn't make any sense to try and make a change. Maybe there's someone long-term that would be better in that position, but for now, you know what I mean? Imagine if Vivid's eyes weren't messed up the first day, day and a half, 2 days. They might have made top 3. They might have made the finals. Who really knows, right? So shout out to the Ravens, honestly, for despite the adversity, they still played well. And then for now, our top 3 team in third, we have the Miami Heretics. I mean, this was like the story. This was the Cinderella run of the event, right? I mean, it's hosted in Spain. It's hosted in Madrid. Miami Heretics are a Spanish organization with full Spanish roster. Obviously, this wasn't like their hosted major, but it was basically the home major anyway. It was great to see the crowd rooting for them, cheering for them, right? The family, friends, everybody. They had like a whole section up in the stands of all Heretics fans. They all had jerseys, towels. Someone had a big flag with like Real's face on it. It was super cool to see like the fan base rallying behind them. Rencor's interview after the series they won was it to qualify for top 3? I think it was after they beat Ravens. It was the Rencor interview for the top 3. One of the best interviews I've ever watched, like genuinely. Like the emotion and just seeing how, you know, raw and like human it is on stage for a guy like Rencor in an interview is just so amazing. I think people forget that like these pro players, for one, are just humans at the end of the day, but also like at one point they were just like kids playing COD, like with dreams of being pro one day. Like I'm sure many of you, and myself included, were in those shoes one day when we were in middle school or even high school playing COD. Like, man, I want to go pro one day. I'd love to play pro Call of Duty because I just love playing the game. And they finally make it. And for a guy like Rencor, right, he was saying he was nervous. Obviously, he was trying to do the interview in English. And his English is not great, even though I thought it was good. Like, I understood everything he was saying. It was actually good English. But, you know, in his mind, the interview was not, or his English was not great. And, like, you could see the emotion. And, like, I think everybody who watched that interview genuinely became a much bigger fan of Rencor and of the Miami Heretics for what they did this weekend. So, shout out to them. Shout out to Rencor. You know, I put out a tweet. He dropped a like on it, so I'm glad he saw it. But genuinely was just such an amazing interview to watch. But my takeaway for this team is when Lucky picks up the pace a little bit, they just look much better. This weekend, I think Lucky played a little bit faster. I feel like they got a bit more out of him in the respawns this weekend than they tend to get. And when he's playing a bit quicker, I mean, we see what they're capable of, right? I mean, they got a top 3 on LAN over a team like Ravens, over a team like OPTIC. You know what I mean? Both of those teams they beat. So I just think if Lucky continues to play a little bit faster, just a little bit, doesn't have to, you know, go crazy, but just plays a little bit faster, it's going to help. People might say still bring in Super. I don't see them making a change after getting a top 3, but right now, this Miami Heretics team should be feeling pretty good. Now we get into our grand finals. And before I talk about LAT and then FaZe specifically, I want to talk once again about the finals as a whole. This was probably the best or second best grand finals of the CDL era. The only one that might go over that was obviously, you know, the Minnesota Miracle reverse sweep 5 games straight when they went down 4-0 to Toronto Ultra back in Cold War. That was obviously insane, but this one might be right up there. And for me as a Thieves fan, when I take my bias glasses off, this series was just incredible, right? Obviously, every map we lost, every gunfight we lost, and at the end was just heartbreaking for me. But just looking at it as a fan of the game, as a fan of COD, which I honestly am first and foremost. Like, Thieves are my team. I love that team with a passion, but I'm even more passionate about just competitive COD itself. And this series was just the perfect grand finals to start off the year, right? I think it was like the epitome of everything we saw in BO6 with how close and competitive, how, you know, just how much hype can be in these matches. Seeing Atlanta FaZe and LA Thieves go blow for blow, map for map, all the way to Game 7, all the way to round 11, to have one round close out an entire weekend of COD, right? Like, think about that. We played a whole 4 days of Call of Duty, and everything came down to a single round of Search and Destroy, bro. It is like, those are the moments that we watch COD for, right? Like, some people say, like, it's kind of corny that everything comes down to one round. They think it should be like first team to win 2 straight. I think there's something special in the fact that it comes down to one thing. It comes down to one moment. Who's going to make the play? Who's going to fuck up? Like, who has the composure? Who has the ice? I think that is one of the best parts about our esport. So Round 11s are insane, and especially being in a game 7. I mean, just absolutely wild. This Major 1 finals just started the season in the most perfect way. To talk about the team specifically, we'll start out with LA Thieves, right? Heartbreaking for my guys, man. I wanted them to win more than anything. I wanted to see Dan Ghosty get his first chip right now. He's now 0-4 in grand finals. You know, one of the nicest guys in the scene, and just still hasn't been able to get across the line, which is super unfortunate. So I feel for him. But the whole team played well this weekend, right? Everyone was hating on them, doubting them because of how they'd been playing online a couple weeks prior after the winter break. They rallied together. The hardpoint was just back in action, looking great once again. The control was still really good. The SND, which is clearly our worst mode, was way more competitive than I thought it was going to be, especially against Atlanta FaZe, who, going into this event, I've said multiple times, LAT versus FaZe, it feels like FaZe is just going to win because their SND just outclasses ours, and it ended up being that way, but it was way closer than I thought it would be. And man, yeah, like at the end of the day, right, one round goes differently, and LA Thieves are the ones celebrating instead of FaZe, right? It literally came down to a single round, 4 gunfights, essentially, right? 4 kills, even though they didn't get all 4 kills. They ninja defused in the last round, which they did like 3 times. I don't even want to talk about the ninja diffuses, bro. Our SND needs work. And I mean, that brings me right to the takeaway for LA Thieves, right? They got to fix SND. If they dial in their search and destroy, I genuinely think they can be the best team in the game. And I think anyone who watches believes that or agrees with that as well. Even if you're a FaZe or an OPTIC fan, if LA Thieves SND is better, these guys are dangerous. And this is going to be a team that can take it to grand finals every single event. The SND specifically, I just want to say this, right? As a Thieves fan, I got even more thoughts about this team than any other one. The way they play the straightforward maps, the vault, the skylines, where it's kind of just like, it's really one-dimensional. You sort of just bang something out, get bomb down, and then play defense. Or on defense, you either wait for a pick or you try to counter bang it out and see if you could stop them from planting. Those maps we need to get better at, right? I think that was really what hurt our SND map pool. On maps like Red Card, right? We saw LAT play Red Card a ton this weekend in Search. It's a bigger map. There's gaps. There's room for Hydra or Envoy to find a gap in the enemy's defense and get a first blood, or get a nice pinch where you can get a kill that secures a round. But on Vault or on Skyline, they just gave too much map control to FaZe specifically, right? And anyone else they played, but specifically FaZe, because that's who we lost like every SND to. Just gave them too much map control. We're waiting and playing too passive, I guess, thinking FaZe might scam, but FaZe is just not a team that's going to mess up like that. You might get some other teams to do that, but FaZe is just not going to, they're not going to throw away an advantage. So they just got to work on SND, man, and I think they're going to be good. But let's talk about the champions. Let's talk about Atlanta FaZe. First things first, congratulations to them. Congratulations to the FaZe fans. FaZe is unbeatable right now. I mean, they haven't lost in, 12, 13 matches at this point. They look insane. Some of their maps end up really, really close, but they always ice up. They always close it out. And the composure from this FaZe team is just absolutely insane, and something I wish LAT had, because I feel like we choke more than we don't, and FaZe close it out more than they choke, and that's why they won the event. I think for me, the key takeaway here, and I genuinely think like the win for FaZe came down to this one thing. Like if I had to pick one thing as to why I think FaZe won, I think this is the one thing. They just have the best team composition for the current meta in Black Ops 6. When you need to run 3 or 4 Jackals on a map like Hacienda, like Vault, they just are the best at this. Celium with the Jackal, I think, is the best player at flexing from AR to SMG in the league at this point. I think a guy like Kenny or a guy like Scrapper, Ghosty, if they continue to work at it, could rival him in this, but genuinely, Celium and Draws did this too, but I think it was really MC with the Jackal when he would flex to it was the difference maker for this FaZe team. Being able to put that pace on the map. All right, obviously the Jackal is the god gun, but being able to get those kills, be good, put the pace on the map, like I just said, it was the difference maker. And we saw it in the Haciendas, in the Vaults versus LA Thieves. There was times where like Ghosty would pull out the Jackal, but we just weren't matching pace. Sometimes we had 2 ARs and they would have 4 Jackals or 3 Jackals, and it's just not going to work, especially when the Jackal is the best gun in the game. And I really think that's what it was. I think Celium and his ability to use the SMG was the biggest takeaway for me as to why they're just so good right now and why they won the event. But those are my thoughts on Major 1. I'm sure we're going to talk about this a ton more. But now I want to get into the Ask Jake segment. I got 4 questions from the last video. There are even more that I didn't pick, so If I didn't answer your question, drop more down below in the comments on this video. The questions can be pretty much about anything you want, right? It's just fun to kind of talk about different things and engage with you guys. So yeah, let me know what you think about Major 1, but let's talk about and answer some of these questions. And first up from Morgan Ellis, we got, how do you think a team like Boston Breach weighs the decision of keeping a roster that had so much emphasis on cohesion and teamwork versus going out and getting a new player and potentially ruining that chemistry? And this is a great question, right? Because it's perfect. After the major, Boston went out top 12, disappointing finish. This team was built around teamwork. It was built around the cohesion, like Morgan said in the question. But how do you balance that versus like, we should just bring in someone that's potentially individually better that would raise the ceiling and the floor of this team, but you might mess up the team chemistry? And for me, I think it truly just comes down to the players and how they feel they can adapt with a new player, and also who's available, right? If there's someone they already maybe know or they have some sort of chem with, that obviously helps. But I ultimately think if you're going to make a change, the best time to do it is sooner rather than later, because we've seen how competitive this year is. And as the year goes on, the top teams are only going to get better. And I think it's going to get slightly less competitive when you're playing FaZe, when you're playing Thieves, when you're playing OPTIC, when you're playing Ravens, when you're playing Ultra. These teams are going to get better, right? They're going to get better. And if you don't raise your floor, raise your ceiling by potentially making a change for a player that will help in that matter, you're just going to be behind. So if you go into Major 2 and the same thing happens, you go out top 12, you go out top 8, and then you're like, okay, now we're going to drop Awakening, or now we're going to drop Cammy. You have even less time to get the chem going. You have even less time to get cohesion, get teamwork before moving into that next major at Major 3 or Major 4 or Champs. So for me, I think obviously it just comes down to the players and what they think, but sooner rather than later, you don't want to be in a position where you're in Major 3 qualifiers, your team's super underperforming on LAN, you're fighting for a champ spot, and now you're making a change, and you're kind of setting yourself back because you got to get used to that new player. Second question here come from Matt Johnson, and he asked, good or bad, which team and which player surprised you the most on LAN at Major 1? So we're going to do both. We're going to do good and bad, and we're going to do team and players. So good in terms of teams that surprised me at Major 1. Obviously, it's going to be Miami Heretics for the team. Them getting top 3, I don't know if they're going to be able to replicate that going forward, but it was a great story. I did not think they were going to get top 3, obviously. I think I had them like top 8 or maybe even top 6 in my bracket because I just felt some home crowd cheese, you know what I'm saying? But obviously, they were the good surprise. And then good for a player that surprised me on LAN. Honestly, for me, and I kind of expected this, but I think the community sentiment and also just how good they were, it's Envoy, bro. Envoy was LA Thieves MVP this event. If they would have won the event, he should have gotten the MVP award. He was everything, bro. There's so many maps where he just put the team on his back, would pop a 2 or 3 piece in a crucial moment and just keep the game alive. He was genuinely the best player at so many moments. And for a guy on a team like with Scrap and Hydra to say that is just insane and goes to show how good Envoy is at this game and how good he is on LAN. People have been saying he has bad maps. He's never had a good map this season. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what we're talking about. Envoy is incredible. He was good online. He was even better on LAN. So for me, he's the surprising good player. And now on the flip side, let's talk about bad. Bad for the teams. Obviously, OPTIC. I already talked about them. You go in as the #1 seed. You go in as the best hardpoint team, a good S&D team, a good control team, and you bow out top 8. Obviously, super disappointing. And then for player on LAN who disappointed me the most, honestly, probably Dashy or Shotzi, right? I think they played underwhelming at the event, right? Like statistically, I don't even honestly know what their stats ended up as, but just eye test watching the game, it just felt like they didn't really have a lot of impact. I feel like I didn't hear the casters get hyped and say their name. I didn't see them make really any big plays. It was really just HAVOK, I feel like, who was consistent for that team, and the other 3 were kind of not really there. And for Shotzi and Dashy being looked at as the best AR and the best SMG in the league by a lot of people heading into the event, super disappointing. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, OPTIC fans, you guys filled out the whole disappointing section of this question, but I'm sure for you, it's probably similar answers. All right, our third question here comes from T2C Reaper, who asked, who are your top 4 to 5 favorite COD players? And I think this is an interesting one, right? I guess we're talking about all time. So my favorite pros of all time, NADESHOT is #1 and SCUMP is #2. Those guys are a big reason, like I'm sure many of you, that I even watch competitive COD. Growing up watching that duo, the content, and obviously them competing is just so much of my childhood, watching like 60-50 and beyond with what they've all done since. Those 2 are without a doubt my favorite. After that, though, I mean, it's obviously up in the air. Octane and Kenny. I'd probably say Octane, Kenny, and Envoy would be like my next three, but Dan Ghosty's right up there. And there's so many other players. Attach is right up there. Attach is a guy I've really liked for a long time. So those are probably some of my top favorite players. And then my last question here comes from my guy Cooper, who asked, which 4 retired players would you pick to build the best BO6 roster? And he said you can only take 2 players from the dynasty. So for me, I'm starting out with Scump. I mean, it's Scump, right? He was one of the best players every single year he played. Obviously, I'm taking him. And I'm also pairing along another dynasty member in Crim6, winningest player. The guy just knows how to win. He's got the mentality. He can also flex. So Scump is one of my subs. Crim as my flex, without a doubt. And then my other sub to pair alongside Scump is going to be Zuma. You know what I'm saying? Aggressive. He can run the flank while Scump slays out. I obviously I've seen Zuma play BO6. He's nasty at it. And lastly, AR, my main AR on this team, another guy who I know is nasty at BO6, who retired at the peak of his powers. It's the human turret. It's Octane. I just talked about him as well. I would want that team. So I'd go Zuma, Scump, Crim, Octane as my 4 for a roster of BO6 retired pros. But yeah, man, that's going to do it for this episode of Champ Sunday, or Monday with Jake Maverick, right? Like I said, I try to upload these on Sundays, but sometimes I'm just wiped out from watch partying for 9 hours. So I appreciate the support on all the videos, on all the watch parties, on all the streams. Make sure to check out Juvie. Use code MAV at checkout for 10% off, and Agent Picks. The links are in the description. I appreciate you guys a ton, man, and I'll see you all in the next one.